Good morning, members of the Des Moines City Council. I'm Ben Page. Ewing Park on the left-hand side of your map is 357 acres in size and was gifted in 1937 to the city by Mrs. Winnie Ewing Coffin to be preserved as a recreational park and owned by the city of Des Moines. Easter Lake Park on the right-hand side of the map is owned and operated by Polk County Conservation. Together, they create over 800 acres of contiguous parkland. Despite sharing a common border, these two parks have operated independently and are thought of by many as two separate parks miles apart. Changes and improvements are now being made to ensure the park users have the opportunity to experience both parks as one large park and recreation amenity. Some recent improvements include the new dog park. In the summer of 2011, the city opened its first dog park. This 9-acre park provides shade and plenty of room to run for the 1,000 plus license holders of our dog park. Also, the Ewing Park Lilac Arboretum master plan was updated. First started in 1940, the Arboretum contained over 1,500 plants and 500 varieties of lilacs at its height. Due to the age of the original lilacs, many have been in steady decline. Through the dedication of many volunteers and support from many donors, including the Friends of Des Moines Parks and the Easter Lake Neighborhood Association, the Arboretum is now experiencing a new renaissance. Additionally, a lilac festival is held each year now when the Arboretum is in full bloom. Traditionally, the best time to see the lilacs in full bloom has been Mother's Day weekend. However, with the early onset of spring, we are already experiencing some blooming. In addition to the already completed work, the following projects are in progress and seek to continue and to improve both Ewing and Easter Lake Park through the connectivity and improve opportunities. Paved trail connections are a major component in connecting these two parks together. A 5-mile trail loop shown on this map will circle around Easter Lake as well as with connections to surrounding neighborhoods. When completed, this trail loop has the potential to attract as many or more users than the widely popular Cried-Near Trail at Grays Lake. The first phase of the paved trail constructions are currently underway with a trail along the rebuilt Indianola Road and the construction of a bike and pedestrian tunnel under the road near the dog park on the left-hand side of your map. Additionally, segments of the trail are in the planning and design stages and will connect from the dog park east into Easter Lake Park and will include nearly 2 miles of trail into Easter Lake. These trails are highlighted in yellow on this map. This trail is a joint effort between the city and Polk County Conservation Board, which both have secured grants toward the construction of the trail. As you can see, that the 2 miles once again is in the yellow dashed sign, and that's around the estimated cost of $1.4 million. And we've been rather successful in obtaining almost a little over $500,000 in grants from the MPO right now. We have a pending request of $400,000 too, and as well as we have some city CIP funds dedicated to this, as well as Polk County has some CIP funds as well. In addition to the paved trails, 2.5 miles of nature trails will be constructed in the park near the Soapbox Derby track at the base of the Lilac Arboretum. These trails, which will follow the contours of the land, will be constructed with assistance from a grant from the Wellmark Foundation and the Friends of Des Moines Parks. The Central Iowa Trail Association, a nonprofit volunteer group responsible for the nature trails in Greenwood and Ashworth Parks, will lead this effort to design and construct the trails with the help of many volunteers, including local Boy Scouts. These trails will allow for a multitude of recreational uses, including walking, biking, bird watching, and nature-based photography.
Ben, could you go back to that slide, please? Yep. 2 questions on the Wellmark grant. How much is that grant? Do we know?
That grant was just right around $8,000.
Okay. And constructed by volunteers. Will we have a way that we can track the amount of time?
Yes.
So that we'll be able to keep track of all of that? We
track all of our volunteer time. We actually have each volunteer sign a form, and we track all their times. Yes.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
To further connect these two parks together in the eyes of the park user, a new marketing and promotional map is in the works. This marketing effort is the result of a suggestion from Councilmember Meyer and a successful partnership between Polk County Conservation and the Easter Lake Neighborhood Association. This map will be unveiled to the public in the spring. However, we have provided a draft for you today. If you'll note, it's two-sided. It speaks to the history of both parks as well as the current attractions and key elements. It also gives users an idea of where they're at and where the trails will become. Most of these trails are already existing, but they're just in a basic form right now, cut through the trees and through the land, so it's just dirt-based. Beyond these projects and plans, there are many other future opportunities for the improvements of these two parks. Last October, Councilmember Meyer hosted a canoe and walking tour of the two parks with local neighborhood leaders, Park and Recreation Board members, and staff from Polk County Conservation in the city of Des Moines. The participants were overwhelmed with the beautiful landscapes that many did not know were available to recreate on, even though this land was literally in their own backyards. Upon completion of the tour, this group urged us to continue to move forward and to work with the City Council to keep them apprised of the efforts. That concludes today's update on the park. I'm glad to take any questions you may have.
Any questions?
Ben, I have a few questions, comments. First off, I'd like to thank you and the rest of the staff for putting this together. I think it's important for people to know the efforts and what the opportunities are. Can I get an update on the lilacs at some point? I think that's an important part of this and where we're at with that. Also, in addition to this, the Department of Natural Resources is undertaking an effort to actually do some pretty high-level water quality improvements out there, similar to what they did in Carter Lake over by Council Bluffs. And I think a lot of people will be surprised at at what they see in the next couple of years out at Easter Lake. As you said, Ben, that this is a joint effort between Polk County and the city. Would it be possible, Rick, for us to form a group and a task force to see some of this through? And I certainly will be a part of that and get sort of the neighborhood more involved in this and help us get the notice out that this is happening. Is that something we can do?
Brian, I think it's really a terrific idea, and this is a project that's going to take funding from a lot of different sources, and I think an association or a task force, call it what you will, that is dedicated to that purpose and helps us and helps the county and helps others identify the funds necessary to make this happen, I think is a really good idea. We've had similar organizations with the Grays Lake project and with other major projects, and this one certainly falls into that category. So I think it's a great idea, and I'm quite sure that Ben and his staff would be happy to help you put something like that together.
Thanks. And one of the things I noticed was one of the things we did when we did that last year, we saw that Yater Creek leading up to, if you'll notice, Ewing Park actually goes to the tip of the lake and has most of Yater Creek in its jurisdiction. And I think people are surprised to know that Ewing Park actually goes across Indianola Road and is actually what most people would consider part of Easter Lake Park. But one thing I noticed there last year, and we talked about, Ben, was that we had seen a lot of debris, tires, and that's. Is there any effort to do like a trash bash and clean that up? And I mean, I think we talked about it, but I don't think we ever followed through on doing that last year.
Yes, we did follow through. This coming April, I believe it's the 20th, we're going to host Trash Bass again this year, and one of the locations will be that park in those areas. Brian's correct. When we took the canoe ride, you could see over the years the flood debris that had collected at the mouth, if you will, of Easter Lake, tires, chairs, just all kinds of debris. So we are going to work with a couple groups to try to clean that up this year.
Great. And I would like to do another canoe ride, and I'd like to invite the rest of the council. But one of the things I noticed, I went out this weekend. I went to the very northern tip of the southern side of the lake, which is out by where that pavilion is. Mm-hmm. And I started down what's called the Apple Orchard Trail. And I'd like to go that with you and Don sometime again and go on that side. I walked all the way to the dog park. It wasn't easy. I went through some brush. I had my dogs with me and my 10-year-old. But after a half hour, we found our way to the dog park. And I just want to see if there's an opportunity to go on that walk with you. I mean, I went over, there's great opportunities there to connect and see where this trail is going to go. So I don't have any other comments.
We'd be glad to do that.
Ben, I had a question. It looked like the smallest funding was coming from Polk County, but maybe the largest land portion is theirs. Is there any idea we get some more funding from Polk County?
Yeah, let me look at that slide real quick. Yes, you can see where the parks separate there, if you will. The largest cost, I'm told, is on our end because of the terrain, and there's also a few other crossings of Yeater Creek as part of the trail. So right now, this first phase is going to be more expensive on our portion of the land than it is theirs for the first phase. Polk County is also offering to take care of all engineering fees for the trail, too. But there is that is a great request to have for additional funding from Polk County.
Is this Polk County or Polk County Conservation Board money, or how does that work at Easter Lake?
It's from the county.
Okay. And then just piggybacking off of Bob, the $1.3 million, is that just for the section that we're talking about right here, phase one?
Correct. The yellow dashed line is what we're considering phase one.
Okay. And then how much is the rest of it to circle the whole thing? Do we have an estimate on that?
Our park planner, Richard Brown, tells me it's about 2 or 3 more million above and beyond this. It's
Okay.
a 5-mile loop. This gets you about 2 miles of the 5 miles.
Could I just interject? I mean, Mr. Mahaffey's question and then Mr. Coleman picking that up, there is, for this first phase, as Ben says, the majority costs are on the city, but those future phases, the majority of it would be on county within Easter Lake Park. And I sure think it makes sense for us to reach out to the Polk County Board. I think that's the board, really, the county board, the Board of Supervisors really allocates funding for this or not. The Conservation Board, I don't think, really has the resources unto themselves to do it, so they really depended upon the Board of Supervisors to fund it. And it would make sense for, in whatever schedule seems appropriate, to reach out to the Board of Supervisors and talk about those future phases, what they might be able to do.
One thing to note, too, on this slide is if you notice where on the bottom there, where the orange and the yellow connect, there's a bridge there, and that's kind of where I started off on my trip. And there's a bridge crossing the inlet there to Yeater Creek. Then you go a couple hundred feet, there's another bridge. There's already bridges that are crossing these inlets, and they're wooden. And there's benches along the way, but very few people know about this trail. In addition, I want to point out that something we never talked about, with the expansion of Indianola Road, there's going to be an underpass underneath the road to get to the dog park. And so connect the dog park part of Ewing Park with the rest of the trail. And that's why I really want to get at least that part of the trail, our part of the trail, up and running, and then show that it's viable to the county to get it done in a timely fashion.
Is this large enough? We need some signage on there to...
Yeah, well, part of what I want to do is go out and raise, at some point, is make a presentation and raise some private dollars and maybe sell the rights to the signage that says, like, the Wellmark Trail intent or something like that we can put up, you know, if somebody's going to help us with this, that we can certainly name a trail after them. Once we show the idea and show that there's a 5-mile circle trail, circumventional, is that the word you guys use? Circumventional? I don't know, I just made that up. But they once we show that is actually a possibility with this stretch of land, I think we'll be able to go out and raise some private dollars to help.
Be good. I remember we took our walk through there. It seemed like we just went on different directions, and there was other trails coming off the side, but we took the main trail through.
I got lost several times, and so if we had just one, I mean, there are different nature trails and different ways to go, but I ended up at the Boy Scout camp at one point. So.
Mr. Coleman, then Ms. Hensley.
I want to compliment you, Brian, because I know that you're spending a lot of your time trying to make this a really nice amenity for those neighbors and the whole city. I think it's really exciting, and I'll plan on being there for the next tour.
That'd be great.
That'd be wonderful. So the total cost of the project is approximately $4 million when you look, I mean, just based upon what you said, it seems like it could be $3.5 to $4 million.
Close to 4 to 5, depending on engineering. We haven't got all the engineering work done yet. Just on this first section, we've got a little bit of engineering work done, and we're at, for the first 2 miles, just about 1.4. So it's a 5-mile loop with counting connections to the neighborhood. So it could be.
Right. And the reason I ask is I think it's just important, as Brian's talking about, you know, going out and working with the private sector, that if we can get that tied down sooner rather than later and give some naming opportunities, I mean, obviously that's why we were so successful at Grace Lake, so.
We'll do that.
Ben, thank you.
Thanks, Ben.
Well done, Ben.
Thank you.
All right, next on the agenda, mobile home park update.
Good morning, Mr. Mayor, members of council, Phil Delafield, Community Development Department. I am here this morning to give you a brief update on our efforts on the Oak Park and Radio City mobile home parks, one in the north side of Des Moines and one on the south side of Des Moines. Our research into the past ordinances are well underway. These trailer parks have had quite a history. We're discovering their first creation as tourist parks in the 20s, later modified in the 40s, which appears to be the first ordinance that we had regarding their construction, or their arrangement, if you will. These 1941 ordinances set the requirements at that time for health and safety. These later morphed into the R5 zoning ordinance, which we have today. We need to do more research on this point to make sure that the 1941 code is the basic code that starts the specific health and safety requirements. There are also, in addition to that, ordinances that speak to the addition of the units and the parking requirements, and this too needs more study. Quite a difficult task, as you might anticipate, because of the many iterations that these parks have taken over the decades. We started the mapping of the individual units in each of the parks, and that is also well underway. The mapping is necessary in order to establish exactly what setbacks currently exist and compare that to what we will determine to be their grandfather right or their basic requirement for construction. We will compare then those current standards against what the rules say they should have had and determine at that time whether or not we have a violation that exists. At that point, we will have a better understanding of what might be possible. We'll have to consult with the legal department on that to see if there are efforts that we can do that will cause the change that we hope that is possible. There also may be some changes in the codes that we need to do, and at that point we should have a better understanding of what might be possible at that time. In conjunction with the mapping, there is a team of inspectors that will visit each of the sites. These are the building and fire, electrical, and plumbing inspectors that will go out and individually assess what has occurred on each of the units to the extent that we can. This will largely be an exterior inspection of these properties unless there is reasonable basis to obtain a warrant to get inside, or if the property owners give us the ability to go inside these units. Once we understand what changes have occurred to these buildings, we will then know how we can apply our local codes, and we will continue to have the restrictions that are placed on the alterations to the manufactured housing, which are governed by the HUD standards. Those also have changed over time. So there was a period of time when they were regulated by the Department of Transportation, and since that time then they changed over to HUD, and the Fair Housing Standards regulated it. So that research is also going on at this time. Once all of that research is done, then we'll have a very basic understanding of how the rules apply to those specific parks, and we then can take a look at our ordinances and see if other changes are necessary. I caution you that we may not be able to achieve as much as we hope here. We may need to do an ordinance change that perhaps takes a look at improvements over a period of time. And it's also that other codes may come into play as we're doing this investigation. Junk and debris, public nuisance, those things are ongoing during this effort. So if there is a trailer that becomes decrepit during this period, we go after that right away, same way with junk and debris. We're also discovering that there may be some issues with the use of the car lot that's in conjunction with Oak Park, and so we're doing some work on that piece as well. That's the basic outline of where we are today. We think that we can probably be back to you with some recommendations in May, have a firm understanding at that time of where we stand. On a related note, the park on Army Post Road is due to be in compliance at the end of this month. There's been no progress on the removal of those 6 units that were illegally placed, so we are prepared to go forward with a court action on that.
Has that been 3 years? We did 3 years on that, I think,
Yeah.
didn't we?
Yeah.
Wow.
3 years. Thank you.
It's been 3 years. I do have a couple of questions.
Uh-huh.
With regard to, just to clarify for people that may be watching or interested, to clarify the reason that we are having so many problems and issues with bringing these up to code is because when you reference the 1941 things that they did in 1941, the first ordinances, it's we have to go all the way back because they would be grandfathered in because they haven't changed use, and grandfathered in because of their due process rights. And so we don't really have the ability to just say, you have to bring these up to the current code. We have the ability to say, you have to bring these up to the 1941 code, which is not very helpful. But if there's been transitions in what we found over at the Fort Des Moines Park that we just spoke about, in 2009, we found that they were out of compliance with the ordinance that was in place probably in the late 60s, early 70s, and they had actually added trailers and were out of the compliance for that particular code. And so we were able to tell them they had to move those or somehow abate that situation, and they have not done that, and so we'll move for enforcement. In addition, at Fort Des Moines, we also own, as I understand, we own part of the frontage that has
An encroachment of
encroachment of about 3 or 4 trailers, or is it more than that? 6?
6.
6 trailers. And so I believe, maybe Sue knows this, that we gave them the extension at the same time to deal with, in 3 years, transitioning out for both the encroachment. We gave them the extension on the contract and on to abate the problem that was there earlier. Is that correct?
You have it exactly right.
I have a good memory.
Who are the owners of these trailer courts? Are they local out of area?
Oak Park is.
Radio City is a condo, and it is owned by an association of people, and Oak Park is owned by...
Mayor, Council, Richard Clark is the title holder who is deceased.
Oh.
I apologize.
Yeah.
So
You
it
beat
is
us to him.
It is in probate at this point.
You should have seen the register comments when we did the story on it. They all thought it was this guy over here.
No, totally different, and he is deceased. So.
Okay.
That Radio City's the one on Northeast 14th you're talking about, right?
It is.
Yeah.
That's the extent of my update at this time. Do you have questions for me?
Any other questions?
Well, going back to the condo aspect, though, how long has it been condoed?
We don't...
About
2 or 3 years.
Frank, you may recall back, what was the 90s, we did a lot of R5 zoning that we
Yes.
were trying to restrict and eliminate some of the future areas going into R5.
It was painful.
Yeah.
Anything else?
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right, let's quickly move over to debt management.
Mayor and Council, Scott Sanders is going to make this presentation, and I'll just tell you, we have had a debt management policy for quite some time. It dates back, I'm looking out here at Alan, I think he and I worked on the original one back in the 1995. And it served the city really well, but we're in a different era now with our debt and the fiscal challenges that we face. And Scott has come up with some really good analysis and some good thinking as to how we might want to consider modifying that policy. So
Good morning, Mayor, council members. Scott Sanders, Finance Director. Yes, Rick is correct. Now that the next year's fiscal budget has been approved, Finance Department typically moves right on into looking at the CIP and the debt issuances that will be necessary this May to get those projects completed and get them started in some cases as well. And so as part of that process, you're aware we've had several conversations about the needs of the utilities to issue debt to get several very large projects going. And because of that, then I was able to look at the current policy for the city and find an opportunity to possibly save on interest costs for those debt issuances only associated with utilities and the enterprise funds. So with that, then, this idea was born and then discussed with staff, and I bring it to you today as a topic of discussion to be followed up with actual action at the next council meeting, if appropriate. So with that, I'll jump right in. The current policy that the city has for debt issuance revolves around the GO bond issues. That's general obligation bond issues. And in case you don't know, the general obligation, what that means is the debt that is issued with the GO tag is backed by the city's taxes and taxing ability. So essentially, when you issue GO debt as a city, you're locked into paying those principal and interest payments and raising the tax rate as necessary to pay for those. Now, here's the key, though, that you can issue GO debt and pay for the principal and interest with other sources of income. And the city does have a little bit of a history in doing that, if you go back a few years, with utility payments, making debt payments, as well as a hotel-motel project several years ago where GO debt was issued but paid for by some hotel-motel funds. And other cities do utilize this issuance of GO debt but paid by the utilities when they find that they have the capacity to do so.
Which hotel was that we did that with?
I wouldn't, it would have been quite a few years ago, I think.
Was it Embassy Suites?
It's not necessarily that. It
was Principal Park. It was actually Principal Park and several other projects. You actually had a referendum, so you were able to use hotel motel on it, but you actually issued it as a GO, which kept the interest rate down on it.
Okay.
Yeah, I should have clarified that it was hotel motel taxes, not the project that was a hotel.
Okay.
And so the state of Iowa has a limitation that cities can only issue up to 5% of their valuation towards GO debt. And so the city of Des Moines currently has a little over $11 billion of valuation. 5% of that would give you about $558 million of debt capacity under the state's constitution. Currently, the city has about $357 million in debt, or about 64% of what's constitutionally allowed. So the city policy today is to not exceed 80% of that constitutional limit. So the city has self-imposed a stricter limitation to give yourself probably emergency capacity, I would guess.
Just for historical background, and maybe Rick and others can speak to this, but we've increased that from what, 70?
Most recently, yes, we did find that.
And when was that?
Early 2000s.
Yeah,
Very
I
good.
remember.
August of 2000, I was able to find the documentation.
So that's all correct.
Okay.
Okay, so that's where the current policy stands in utilization by the city of Des Moines. Exactly what are the debt issuant needs as we look forward? Both the stormwater and the sanitary have several bond issues that are coming up through the CIP, both in the current year, 2012, 2014, and 2016. Going to the debt that's paid by the taxes and the TIF, we're not looking at any significant increases in those debt issuances. So the 64% that the city has today would not change very much. What that means is the GO debt paid by taxes and TIF, every new issuance is about the same as what we're paying in principal on the old bond issues. And so I can look out several years through the CIP and see that the percentage is just going to stay around that 64-65% for several more years, well under the 80% limitation. It's the enterprise funds with the storm and sanitary that have a need of about $100 million of additional borrowing over the next 4 years that would push that percentage higher if allowed to be issued as GeoDebt. Now again, these utilities have an ability to go out and issue revenue bonds and pay a little bit higher interest rate. And I'll get into some of the differing characters of revenue bonds. But I want to get back to this. 65% would cover the taxes and TIF. The extra $100 million in enterprise funds is equivalent to about another 20% of debt capacity. And so you add those two together and you get about 85% of utilization compared to what the state would allow. And so that's why I'm here today is a proposal that the city policy be bumped up from 80% associated with mostly taxes and TIF issuances to 85% to allow for the addition of enterprise fund debt to be issued as GO.
Scott, how many other cities, how does Des Moines compare with other cities? Let me put it that way. If we're at 80% right now, the larger cities, if you look at the 10 largest cities in the state, are we about the middle? Are we setting a standard? Are we?
I would actually have to look at that current data. My experiences with Council Bluffs, West Des Moines, and then as a consultant for 8 of the largest 10, a lot of those cities have bumped up against their 80% at different times and then come back down below that. Nearly all of them have additional self-imposed, whether that be 80, 85, and there may be a couple that are even at 90%. So what I can do, if you'd like, is bring back a current accounting of that with the other cities to see what their policies are. Understand from a debt issuance standpoint, actually now all 10 of those have the same financial advisor of the 10 largest cities. We'll always hear from them, do you want to issue this debt as revenue or GO, or do you have the capacity to issue it as GO? Because the difference in interest cost, careful here, in my experience has always been lower interest rates on the GO than revenue. And so it's typically almost always the case that you would save money if you had the capacity to issue those revenue bonds as GO. It's more of a policy question for each city whether or not they're willing to do that, or they think they have other needs that may need to be set aside for the GO limitation. So, long answer, but what I can do is bring back to you an exact accounting. But you'll find that our policy would not be inconsistent at either the 80 or the 85% cap.
So at the same time that you're proposing that we go from the 80 to 85% on the GO debt, tonight, for example, we have on the council agenda the master lease agreement. That is debt that is outside. That's not calculated in our debt.
Because there's an annual payment.
Right.
That's
so
appropriated.
How do you see that moving forward then? Is that going to be staying consistent? Are we looking at doing more of that at the same time we're being asked to increase from 80 to 85?
To be honest with you, I don't know that we have a policy on how much the lease. I'll let Alan maybe ask how that would intertwine.
Alan McKinley, Deputy City Manager. Tonight's agenda item on the master lease is a sanitary sewer. Sanitary storm or just sanitary?
3 trucks.
Yeah, 3 trucks.
Sanitary. So that would have no impact on our debt margin or debt limit because its dedicated revenues are from a utility.
The fees. Okay.
We do occasionally do master lease that's paid for out of our debt service, but we've established in our master lease agreement an annual appropriation clause that allows that not to be counted against our debt margin, our debt limit calculation. It's a much smaller amount than, I think, the $1.1 million. We also put them on a rather short retirement schedule, 5 to 7 years, so they're pretty much paid off rather quickly, and what's put on is usually what's the amount that's being retired each year.
I guess I just want to make sure I understand how these if they're on parallel, if we're looking at using the master lease agreement?
To replace?
No. The master leases for utilities, I think, are anticipated
for
to continue to be used for utilities.
Okay.
If I could add, the master lease fills that niche of short-term borrowing for vehicles that we would prefer not to put in with the 20-year bonds.
Okay.
So it's really a different group of equipment needs compared to the CIP.
Scott, it might be helpful because I think we've all got some questions on this. If you'd complete this presentation, and then we can come back because maybe you're going to answer some of our questions. I've got huge problems with debt, and there might be some further discussion that all of us would need to have with you as we move forward here.
Okay.
So
We'll see if the rest of this benefits that. So essentially, this policy is not aimed at changing the debt service levy or the taxes that you levy to pay debt service. The focus of this policy change is to allow for lower interest costs of the enterprise funds. The excess capacity then, if the policy is approved at 85%, leaves you with 15% capacity for emergencies, and that's equivalent to about $80 million of excess capacity that would still be available for emergencies or other needs.
do you want to advance your slide, Scott?
Oh, sorry, thank you. The excess capacity of 15% could be utilized for things such as this franchise fee litigation that's going on. We anticipate that the franchise fee would not, settlement would not be more than $50 million in cost. And so the $80 million in excess capacity could more than cover the franchise fee and then other needs as well, above and beyond that. So what exactly are the differences between the revenue debt and GeoDebt? The revenue debt usually carries a lower credit rating or a less preferable credit rating, such that the interest costs are higher, usually 1 or 2 steps lower in the credit rating than what the city's Geo credit would be. As far as numbers go, the interest rates themselves would be 15 to 20 basis points higher for a revenue debt issuance. And that would equate to about $600,000 in interest costs over the life of $15 to $16 million bond issue. And that is similar to what we're looking at annually, every 2 years, both for sanitary and storm. And so we're looking at 6 bond issues between the 2 major utilities, and each of which would save about $600,000 over the life of those bond issues. Another element of revenue debt is that they typically require additional covenants. A good example of that is the requirement to have reserve funds set aside. Now, those reserve funds, you might anticipate, are there in case there's a problem with the utility cash flow and its ability to make its debt payments. The credit and the market, if you will require a reserve fund of up to 10% above what the borrowing needs are to be just set aside. So what you're doing is artificially inflating the amount of debt that needs to be issued when you go the revenue route. And because of that, then you've borrowed at, let's say today, 3.25%, an additional $1.5 million that can only be invested short term over the next 90 days, maybe 6 months, in case you need it to pay for the next payment. And so you may only be getting 20 basis points out of that investment in today's market. So again, there's another $600,000 of interest lost, if you will, or cost, that is due just to the additional reserve fund requirements that are associated with revenue funds, the revenue debt. Lastly, then, there's often coverage ratios that are required with revenue debt. And what that coverage ratio is is that the market demands that you have net revenues, which are your current operating revenues minus your current expenses, that are equivalent to what you need to pay in your debt, plus an extra 25%. And so what it can cause oftentimes is that you have to keep your rates for the utilities a little bit higher to satisfy the debt market that you have these coverage ratio requirements included in. So from a purely dollar sense, each bond issue as a revenue bond costs between $1 million and $1.2 million additional over what it would cost as a GO. So it's a very significant savings opportunity, and that's, again, why I'm in front of you this morning. As a kind of a last note here, I don't want anybody to get the impression that, well, at least with revenue debt, worst case scenario, you could just not make those payments. Although that you could go down that path, I can guarantee you it would bring on national attention, as you see with Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, and some others that have revenue debt situations that have gone bad and have defaulted on those payments. So just a word of caution that as a finance director, I would always recommend that we use every opportunity available to pay even revenue debt to make that whole, so that we don't have a bad reputation, if you will, out in the bond market, because that can affect all our debt issuances. I wanted to give you a graphic on what the current policy looks like, and then what the proposed change would look like. The bars are the existing debt that we've issued through last May's bond issue. Those indicate the outstanding principal amounts on all our existing debt. The red line at the top is the state's constitutional limit, for which we cannot go over. And then the green is a self-imposed 4%, if you will. That's equivalent to 80% of the state's requirement. So moving forward, you'll see the purple drifts off as we pay the existing principal on the debt that we have today. And then the white in the middle is the new bond issues that we need to have that are related to the CIP and will be paid by taxes and TIF. And so you'll see, if you add the purple and the white together, it levels off nicely. And that will enable the city to keep a constant debt service tax rate to make payment on the principal and interest of that debt. And then the orange on the top is what the new policy would allow us to issue as GeoDebt for the enterprise funds. And I want to stress, the principal and interest on this debt would be paid for by the utilities, and it is planned within those cash flows to do so. And then the green, you'll notice the green line becomes dotted to reflect the new proposed 4.25%, which would be 85% of the state's limitation. I'm going to pause for just a second in case there is a question on these numbers, because this illustrates best how the numbers would shake out. Graphically.
Just the trajectory of the green line, assuming that it goes from 4 to 4.25, is our baseline assumption about values in the city almost flat over that period of time?
Great question. What we've looked at historically and then used to project is a 1% increase every non-assessment year and a 3% increase in assessment years. So it's a 1%, 3% rotation, and that's the way historically values change, because they only readdress all values every other year, and that's when you get more of a boost, that 3%.
And I don't want to get ahead of your presentation, but will there be a slide that shows us what the future is of the enterprise fund debt?
No, but I can address that at the end.
Okay,
If that's okay.
That's what I'm mainly interested in.
Okay. I wanted to give you an example.
One question. So in 2012, have we anticipated the reduction in valuation that
Yes.
was Polk County had imposed on us?
Yes, and actually the values that reduced were the January 111 values.
Oh, yeah.
And those are reflected in the 2013 fiscal year numbers.
Okay.
Yep. Great question. So I wanted to give you an example. Parking debt, for instance, the revenue has been declining, so the cash flow or the pro forma is a little challenged right now due to the vacancies in the parking system. The existing parking debt covenants, we have one bond issue remaining that has a nearly $2 million reserve fund requirement. So again, those funds are sitting out there earning very little interest today. The rates have to be sufficient in parking to have that 125% coverage I mentioned earlier, which puts strain on the parking revenues as well. And then in this case of parking, there's also a private activity restriction, whereas when you have a parking structure that was funded with tax-exempt debt, and if that debt is still outstanding, we cannot gift those parking stalls to private companies in the sense of giving away parking. And so there's very strict restrictions on how you can make arrangements with private companies for parking if there's still debt outstanding, tax-exempt debt still outstanding within those parking. So that's another opportunity here that you'll see. I'm proposing that we issue taxable debt that would allow for those restrictions to go away and refinance the old parking bonds.
Just I have to inject this in here. We're doing this not because we're going to give away parking for free, though.
Right.
Please understand that's not the motivation behind Scott's presentation here on parking.
Right.
But it does give us a lot more flexibility in dealing with projects.
You can enter into long-term leases, which you can't do today. So a business comes to you and says, I want to lease 100 spaces for 10 years. Under a tax-exempt situation, you can't do that. With taxable financing, you could, and it does give us a lot more versatility. But it's not all about trying to give the parking away. It just gives us more flexibility to have durable relationships.
So bottom line, just taking the parking system that we have today, if you refinance this as taxable, what would be the savings?
Savings. Excellent question. And so we looked at it both from a refinancing of parking revenue and the geo-taxable, and they are about the same rates. And the savings is about $1.5 million over the life of the existing debt, the 2008 series of parking.
Which would be paid off at what point?
Let's see. The refinancing would be 10 years, a 10-year term to refinance that debt.
Is that extending?
It is extending it by 2 years.
By 2 years.
Yes, the existing 2000 parking debt goes out 8 more years. And so the proposal would be to go out 10 to address the revenue, to lower expenses because our revenues have declined in the parking. And understand that you're still saving the $1.5 million in interest even with the extension of 2 years. The interest rate on that old tax-exempt debt was actually 6%, and we're going to be going to down to probably 3.5% in some of this parking debt. So there's still substantial savings, and then again by going the geo-taxable route, there's more flexibility within the activities that can be used. You also eliminate all the covenants as far as the need for a reserve fund. As soon as you use a GO credit, you don't need to have the reserve fund. That's that extra 10% you have to issuance. And you also get rid of the net revenues requirement, which, again, in limited cases, forces you to raise the rates to have that extra 25% of cash flow for debt. Now, the last opportunity, so once you start down this path, is you realize, okay, so if the city were to issue geo-taxable debt to refinance the parking, we already have some CIP needs that are taxable that we're going to issue in May. we could actually just combine those bond issues together and save yet even more on the cost of issuance by having one debt series instead of two. So that could easily be another $25,000 to $40,000 in savings of cost of issuance, and that's what the last bullet point indicates there. Before I move off this slide, I gave you the parking example. The stormwater and sanitary would be similar without the private activity discussion. If we were to go out and issue stormwater or sanitary revenue bonds, you would have a reserve fund requirement and you would have net revenue coverage requirements. So it would be very similar with that discussion. So in summary, what I'm looking at proposing is changing the policy from 80% to 85% of the constitutional limit, leaving the debt that's going to be paid by taxes and TIF as planned in the CIP. The factor, a couple bullet points down, the factor that controls the debt paid by taxes, I always look at what the tax rate would need to be first. And so with this change in policy, you would still have the same tax rate. This doesn't change the intended tax rate for the debt service payments on the CIP projects. That would stay around $4.10 moving forward. The enterprise funds would benefit from the lower interest rate with the GEO credit, and the excess capacity would still be there sufficient to handle $80 million worth of needs. And then the policy would be presented formally at the next council meeting if positive comments. That ends the presentation.
All right. Before we open it up, Mr. Manager, did you want to make a couple of questions or comments?
Thank you, Mayor County. A couple of things I want you to understand about this. One is that you clearly have a choice here. This is a change you don't have to make. You can leave the policy as it is today. The consequence of that is that the debt for the storm and sanitary sewer and parking system would be issued as revenue bonds. It would be more expensive, but that would have the ability to keep our debt management policy at the 80% level as opposed to 85%. This is a fairly significant decision to increase this rate, but we thought it was necessary to outline for you what those benefits would be, and Scott's done a really good job of laying out the benefits, and we think the benefits are important and compelling here. You have a very unusual situation in my experience with the amount of revenue bond or revenue debt that we're looking at here, particularly in our sewer funds, because you have this $100 million, I think Scott mentioned to your question, Chris, earlier, $100 million of debt in storm and sanitary. That's an extraordinary amount of debt, and if it's all issued as revenue, it's going to be a much more expensive form of debt. So issuing that as GeoDebt will keep the cost down, and you all know we're under some real pressure in our utilities with the rate increases because of the need for cash to pay for unfunded mandates. So that's one of the underlying things that's driving the whole discussion here about policy. But I want you to understand you really do have a choice here. It's a very important policy we're talking about. You don't have to make any decision today. And if you're not ready to make that decision by April 9th, we can push that off as well. I want you to feel comfortable with what you end up doing here. It is a very, very important policy and will shape how we do a lot of things. The last thing I want to say is you do have the franchise refund that you have to factor into your thinking here, and Scott can go back and overlay that as well so you have a sense of what that impact would be. Thank you, Mayor.
Mr. Coleman, then Mr. Mahaffey.
Rick, Manager, you said we didn't have to make a decision today, which is good because I probably don't have enough information to support it today. And I probably wouldn't if this is about a tool for us to go into more debt. And if it's a tool to save the taxpayers money and to make sure that we can manage our tax rate at the lowest possible level, then I'd be supportive of it. But I'd like to see the actual policy well in advance of the Thursday before the meeting, because what concerns me is that if we're going to raise the cap in one pot of GEO bonds, that we make sure that we have a council policy that limits the cap in the other pots, like the enterprise funds, and that's why I ask, is there a corresponding slide that shows what the future is for debt in these other funds? Because if that tool still remains there, then the council can be leveraged at some point to go into a lot more debt than we ever incurred. The thing to me is, if we can raise this by 5%, from 80 to 85%, and we can make sure that the other tools are locked down under our policy, then I would feel really good that we're doing something for the taxpayers. What I want to make sure is that we're not inadvertently creating a tool where this group or any future council has tools to, what would look like maybe even intentionally trying to fiddle with the rules to go into a lot more debt than we have right now.
Mr. Coleman, those are great comments, and I'll hazard a guess, and Scott, you can second this, but essentially all we're doing is shifting the nature of debt from one category to another, from a revenue debt to a GeoDebt. The intent here is not to increase the amount of debt that we take on overall. It is to lower the cost of that debt.
This is a really good slideshow and PowerPoint to educate us about it, but I think we need one to ensure accountability. And like in my mind, it should be like one page, the before and after of our debt in all of our categories, and what it would look like, and a quick little statement about what our limits are, either constitutionally or legislatively through the state, or what our own policy is. And if we could get and include TIF in all of our sources of debt.
We'd be happy to do that. And, and actually, based on this discussion, Mayor and council members, you may want to ask us to bring this back at another workshop before you actually see it on the agenda, so that you'll have time to ask all these questions and we'll be able to respond back.
Well, I'd like that, and I'd like to do it after we have a written policy so we can really react to what we'd be voting on. So, even if it gets bumped up to the week or two before April 9th, well, I guess we are a week away from April 9th.
I think we can make that work.
We just need to
we can do a workshop on the 9th and then maybe wait for the following council meeting to actually, but I totally get that in terms of wanting to make sure that you have all the information.
I want corresponding, if we had a lockdown on our debt because of the 80% rule, I want to see a corresponding policy that, locks us down on other forms of debt, at least through a council policy. So staff isn't bringing a recommended CIP or anything in the future that is against our current policy.
That's a great point, and that is not our intention here. It's just to lower the cost of what we have.
If it's to lower the cost, I think we're onto something that's really good for the citizens.
Okay, Bob?
Chris has clarified some of my questions that I had too, but this had no effect on our bond rating with Moody's and that from our AAA, and we reduced, so to speak, that reserve from 20 to 15%.
Right. Well, I would not anticipate this would affect the credit. We'll have those conversations. Understand that today you're utilizing 64%,
Yeah.
and we don't see that changing with the debt that's associated with taxes and TIF. And so the credit agencies will look at that as a strong factor to not make any changes. All we're asking for is the impact on the enterprise funds, which should not impact our credit. And I bring that up for two reasons, if I could, is that the 2012 sewer and stormwater needs could be issued as GO and only increase that 64% by a few percentage points, staying well under the 80%. And so I'll have discussions with the city manager about maybe delaying that process just a couple weeks, so we have time to have further conversations. The proposal would actually reduce the amount of debt being issued because of those reserve funds, that extra 10% of debt that has to be issued just to set aside as a precautionary. So
You're talking about total debt,
I'm
not
talking total debt.
as opposed to just discussing GO, because it would increase GO debt.
Correct. It would reduce the total debt of the city, and in regards to the enterprise funds specifically.
Christine?
So, Scott, I agree with all the comments up here and the questions, and really, because it is a big decision for us to make as a council, but help me understand why we have not issued this as GO previously.
Well, part of the reason is the identified unfunded mandates are upon us now. I mean, we've had some of the issuances. I don't know how recently there was a revenue bond even issued.
But I mean, we've done some issuances of unfunded mandates. I mean, we've been working on, separation of the sewer system for a number of years.
I think you'd have to go back.
Let me try.
I'm just trying to figure out why we're looking at it now and we haven't gone this route
And I'll
previously.
look back at Alan for some history here as well. But I think if you look back in time, what you're going to find is that there was a time back 20 years ago when, or maybe more, when we issued a lot of, everything was issued as GO. We were sort of where we are today. And I remember we had a lot of debt, for example, GO debt for the airport. And the council basically said back then that that was an inappropriate policy, that they didn't really want to have all this issued as GO. So they just had a different philosophy, and that philosophy has really carried over until today. And the other thing I think that's different is the unfunded mandate, these huge amounts of debt that we have to issue, not that we haven't had debt before in the enterprises we have, but the amounts are much larger now. And I don't know, Scott, but the rate differentials between revenue bonds and GOs are rather significant now.
And they've changed now just in the last.
The GO rates are very, very low.
Very true.
And the revenue bonds, not quite so. So I think there's this differential, this opportunity to save money is perhaps greater now than it's been in the past. Okay. There's not a perfect answer. It simply reflects, I think, we have a finance director who's looked at this a little bit more carefully than we have in the past and has identified an opportunity. We just thought we had to bring it to you. But there's a very important underlying policy, or you've all identified it. And as I said a moment ago, I want you to be comfortable with whatever you decide here, and you clearly have choices as to how you want to go.
And you'll see that in the past, the GO paid by taxes and TIF were bumping up against the 80% back at that point. We're now at 64%. Great management on the debt the last 5-6 years has brought you down to that 64%. Yep. And so there's a capacity, without changing the policy,
that's a good
to utilize.
Scott, excuse me, Scott, I agree with what Councilman Coleman said as far as this bar graph and seeing it with the revenue debt included on there going forward. But could you also show it in the past so we could see what the total debt is in the past? And, I mean, presumably it should stay fairly flatlined in a whatever increasing pattern we have. But so we can see historically where we were total debt and where we will be in the future.
Yes, you would. I think you're asking if I were to put revenue debt on top of the purple lines
exactly.
moving backward.
Exactly.
I think we can provide that. Yeah.
Scott, if you would go back to the page that says debt needs and impact. Keep going back. There. You made a comment about the excess capacity, the 15%, equates to over $80 million. Yes. That's the over the 85%? Is that
correct.
What you're
That's
saying?
the remaining 15%, correct.
But you're saying that would, you were, with your comment, anticipating that might be a source of funds for paying off a
settlement.
Settlement?
That is one opportunity.
Boy, that would push us right to the statutory limit, not even our self-imposed limit.
Well, understand that were if today we were at 85%. And that's a great point, because each time we go to issue debt, I could provide you with where we're at on the debt capacity. Again, today we're only at 64%. If we issue all the 2012 debt that we need to as GO, it's probably a little over 70%. And then in 2014, there's another group of debt that needs to be issued. that would push us probably around 80%. And then it's not until 2016 that we would get to that 85% limit and then only have 80 million. So what I'm telling you is today you have 200 million. Over the next 5 years, it will get down to 80 million. So we will have an answer, hopefully I look at legal, on what that cost will be for the franchise fee well before we even come close to the 85% cap. So
if we issued GeoDebt to do that, which could be an option, that would be paid off with property taxes, right?
There'd be a choice that would have to be made. You can, again, issue GeoDebt and pay from other sources. So, again, I don't really want to get too much into the franchise agreement because there are so many different options.
But I'm just saying that we've got a lot of thinking to do, and I, as everybody else here, I think has mentioned, this is a big decision to be thinking about. And I think we've got to look at all sources and ideas because, we get opportunities to see examples of cities in this country and around the world. Think of one in Canada, for instance, that is a little larger than we are, that has no debt and has $700 million sitting in their fund balance. Not that we are in a position we're able to do that, but there ought to be, we ought to be thinking about paying down debt and in the sources of revenue that we would use to do that. It'd be really nice to be in a situation where we're not worried about what our debt ceilings are and our debt limits are and who's going to pay for it, because at the end of the day, we're here representing property taxpayers and citizens of this city. And, we've been trying to do the best we can, and I appreciate your efforts to continue doing that. But this is a pretty wide, deep subject that I think that we need to have more information on.
Understood.
Anybody else? Scott, thank you.
Okay.
Thanks, Scott.
Let's talk about BRT.
Good morning. Thank you for allowing me to come this morning to talk to you about a bus rapid transit project that DART has been working on for the last several months. As you all know, Des Moines is at a crossroads. We have a lot of regional strengths, a lot of opportunities for growth, and a lot of regional thinking, of regional planning, including regional transit planning in the works. I spoke to you in December about the DART Forward 2035 plan. DART is evolving rapidly. We've really started to build a solid foundation for public transit within the region and really trying to build a top-notch, world-class system that I believe the citizens of the region are looking for. And so we are, as part of the DART Forward plan, we identified 5 corridors that potentially could be rapid transit corridors in the future. Those being University, Douglas MLK, 6th Avenue, Southwest 9th, and then this hybrid type corridor, it's a loop route on University and Ingersoll. Back in August, the DART Commission decided to move forward with planning for the University Ingersoll loop, recognizing that had a lot of opportunity for success as a pilot project in introducing bus rapid transit to the region. So this new bus route will actually be implemented by DART in November as one of our regular local bus routes. And it's really a unique service. Not only does it attract a lot of up-and-coming vibrant neighborhoods within the region, but downtown, major employment centers, medical centers, but also a lot of educational facilities and institutions. There's Drake University, Roosevelt High School, DMU, Central Campus, Mercy College of Health and Science, and then DMAC as well. And all of those institutions have parking constraints, growing campuses, and they're all looking for other transportation options. So this service really provides a unique niche within that segment of the population. So what I'm here to talk to you is how we would take that route and really make it rapid transit, looking specifically at bus rapid transit. There was a group of us, including the Ingersoll Business District, some staff with the City of Des Moines, DART staff, and other stakeholders that went to Kansas City a few months ago to look at their bus rapid transit service. And if you've been there recently along Main Street or Troost Avenue, it's their silver and blue buses that is their bus rapid transit service. And really what bus rapid transit is, it's an innovative, high-capacity transit solution using rubber-tired vehicles instead of a steel-wheeled train. It's designed to be faster, more visible, offer better amenities for the ridership base, as well as promote economic development within neighborhoods. And the highlight of the service is really the level of frequency, attracting more ridership. And as this graphic shows, that a bus coming every 15 minutes or even every 10 minutes really attracts more ridership than a bus that comes every 30 or 60 minutes. And so we'd be looking as part of the bus rapid transit service to offer service approximately every 15 minutes, really trying to promote that spontaneous use of the system. We'd be looking to procure cooler vehicles, more stylish transit buses with unique branding, wider doors and windows, really trying to emulate that train-like feel. We'd be looking to do stations rather than your traditional bus stop, really with a modern design, opportunities for public art that are more visible, bringing that branding from the vehicle into the stations, and really promoting good lighting. There's a map here of all the proposed stations. There's approximately 20 stations in and of itself, but on both sides of the road, you'd be looking close to 40. The station spacing would be longer between stops than you would on a traditional bus route. The station amenities that we'd be looking at shelter, waiting areas, including bench, leaning rail, opportunities for different types of seating within the station element, trash receptacle, lighting, landscaping, schedule information, including real-time customer information signage, LED signs. So what makes bus rapid transit rapid? How is this going to be different? And it's really starting to look at technology within the street and in the signaling system. We would be looking to put emitters on the vehicles such that there would be the potential to, if the transit vehicle is approaching the signal and it's about ready to turn red, that signal would hold a few seconds to allow in a green fashion to hold the vehicle to go through. We'd also be looking at that longer distance between stations for quicker travel time. We've been working with city staff and trying to identify intersections for opportunities for signal improvements to assist the vehicle in moving faster, and those are some of the intersections that we've identified to date. And here's a rendering of how a station would potentially be incorporated on the Ingersoll corridor. This is at 28th Street with the shelter, larger waiting areas, signage, and those sorts of elements.
Elizabeth, is this on the east or west side of 28th?
It's on the east side.
Right there by
Northeast.
Silver Fox, right in front of
Yeah.
Silver Fox? So would we need to acquire property, or is that already property that
We tried to do as much of the enhancement within the right-of-way as possible, and then look to do easements rather than actually acquire property. And this is just a rendering of what it would look like in one spot. We have not gotten to the point where we're actually doing engineering drawings and actual site-specific locating of the stations.
Okay.
This is in the Drake neighborhood on University, and the station has many of the same similar elements. So we're very excited about this project. We think it has a lot of opportunities for Greater Des Moines and addresses a lot of the objectives that many of the planning efforts today, including Capital Crossroads, the Tomorrow Plan, and the Dart Forward Plan, have really put into movement, and as well as city planning efforts within the neighborhoods. So we really feel it's an implementation strategy for a lot of the good planning work that has been done to date, including really creating an urban environment for today's young professional, connecting major amenities and services for residents, including those that are transit-dependent, elderly, and refugees that live within those neighborhoods, facilitating higher education, creating sustainable infrastructure to promote a high-quality and desirable neighborhoods, improving multimodal options, and promoting infill and other smart planning initiatives within the region. We are moving forward with this project at rapid pace because we really feel like there's a timing opportunity here in the next few months that is unique. The FTA has a very small starts grant opportunity. It's an ongoing grant opportunity, but there's no other competing project within our region of this nature at this point in time, so we'd like to think there's an opportunity to advance that given the lack of competition within our planning region. The maximum grant amount is 80% of the project. Iowa has never secured funds under this program, and then there's also an election that is coming up in November. So what will it take? We're estimated the project costed approximately $25 million. We'd be looking to submit a grant application for $20 million to the FTA. And in order to do that, we need to secure $5 million locally in terms of a local commitment to support that federal grant application. And as we've identified here, this is what that $25 million breaks out at. A lot of the majority of the cost is between vehicles and stations, right-of-way improvement, some funds for public art, signage, and those sorts of elements. We really feel bus rapid transit is good for the growth of Des Moines, not only for transit service but our neighborhoods, and really starting to create a transit-focused modal alternative for the region. Again, attracting and retaining young people. I think I may have shared this story with you back in December when I talked about the Dart Forward Plan, but there were several focus groups with Capital Crossroads this past year, one dealing specific with young professionals. And when they asked them what they're looking for in terms of a community, the first thing they said was, or the first two were oceans and mountains. The third thing was better public transportation. We can't do much about the oceans and mountains, but I think we do have an opportunity to do something about public transportation and really creating a better sense of place with it. Again, it connects a lot of unique educational facilities, all that are interdependent on each other, connecting employment, shopping, and recreation. It really looks at a sustainable infrastructure and protecting the environment, and it really starts to instill a sense of civic pride. In Kansas City, 5 years ago, nobody would have said on the classified ads, I live 2 blocks from a MAC station. But when you look at the Craigslist today, on Main Street and apartments available, they say 2 blocks from a MAC station, which I think is pretty incredible. There's also the opportunity for this project to move forward and leverage other projects such as ongoing streetscape and redevelopment projects, as well as other grant funding opportunities. So we hope that as we start to move forward with this project, that we would have the support of the City of Des Moines in building out the project and potentially in offering some level of monetary support in terms of our local match.
Any questions, anybody?
I mean, maybe one of the things we could talk about would be the private sector,
Yeah.
Elizabeth, if you want to just maybe run through all the meetings. And I know we don't have commitments yet, but we're working on finalizing some of that.
Yes, we have. We've been working with, first of all, the state on securing some level of local match. Currently, today in a RIF bill, there is that passed the Senate. There's $2 million to support this effort, which I think is pretty awesome. And as long as it makes it through the House, then that $2 million would be secured. And we have also met with several of the businesses downtown. We do have a commitment from Nationwide, somewhere between $250,000 and $500,000. We haven't narrowed in on that number exactly to date, but we have met with Principal, EMC, Meredith, CenturyLink, Bankers Trust, and a few other businesses that we have, and we have a few other businesses lined up to meet with. All very excited about the project and the opportunity that it not only brings to their business, but the vibrancy of downtown. And so that's kind of where we're at today, and hopeful to narrow in on those numbers and levels of support here in the next week or so.
Rick?
Mayor and council members, I've talked to Elizabeth, and I think I've talked to both Mr. Mahaffey and Mrs. Hensley about the local match. The $5 million local match, and Christine just asked other funding sources, and I know you've got a number of different approaches there that you're working on. In my view, we the city can't pay that local match of $5 million, but we think we can make a contribution towards that. We have done some research into our park and ride revenues. Those are revenues that come off of the Park and Ride project, which was a federally funded transit facility. The revenues that come off of that project are encumbered. They must be used for some sort of transit purpose. We've looked at the funds that are available there, and we think because of the land sale proceeds that we have available in that account, that we could make a local match of about $1 million towards this project. My own view is I don't think we can do more than that, but I think we can do that with that particular source of funding. If there were other sources we had to think about, such as TIF or GEO, I couldn't recommend that to you, but we are very fortunate to have those revenues available to us, and so I think that is a recommendation I'm willing to make to you. This is on your agenda tonight for your consideration, but I do think that's an appropriate thing, and the project would be great. And if we can get it for $1 million of local contribution from us, I think it would be a good thing. So,
a comment and a question. Based upon the discussion we just had this morning on the debt policy, if we were to change the debt policy, would that impact us, the ability for us to give the local match, the $1 million local match?
Well, not really.
How would that change?
Not really. The money we're talking about here is cash available. It doesn't require the issuance of debt, number one. And number two, you might recall the question that Chris Coleman asked about, well, are you really increasing the amount of debt with this new debt policy? But my answer is no. We're simply shifting the category from a revenue to a GEO. So it really wouldn't impact, this particular funding wouldn't impact those numbers, nor does the new policy recommendation constrain it.
Okay. A question for Elizabeth then. What's the absolute last date that we have before this has to go in? What's the drop dead?
Our goal is to have the grant in sometime in April. It's a revolving time to be able to submit it. The reason why we're trying to submit it so quickly and soon is that there's an opportunity, if it's in soon enough, then it could be reviewed in time for the next federal appropriation cycle, which would be this summer, early fall. And so if we don't get it in soon enough, we would have to wait another year in order to potentially fall within that appropriation cycle.
Okay, then
my experience, Elizabeth, is that these dollars are very competitive. How many dollars are in this pool?
It changes annually. The very small starts got shifted out of the new starts money this last year, and it has a separate discretionary pot within a different funding source.
But it's part of the transportation budget, is that correct?
It is.
Okay, so the transportation and the HUD budget have both been thrown into the same bucket, and it has all been reduced. So the question here is, how much money is going to be available now? So I at least what I'm getting to is I'm supportive of you getting it in earlier rather than later. Because this money's going to go away.
Yeah, the funds, I believe, are still funded out of the trust fund because they moved to a bus facilities account within the FTA, and so I believe there's for the current fiscal year there's $50 million that's allocated for BRT, and I'm not sure where they'll end up for the next fiscal year, which is where we try to end up with or end up sliding in with. But yes, we're trying to get in as
$50 million?
And that's for varying degrees of the project. The likelihood is they may do a small appropriation to get us into engineering and project development, and then fund the actual construction of it. It's sometimes a two-part piece.
And I agree, Mr. Mayor. What's holding us in getting it submitted sooner rather than later is just getting tied down the local match, and that's what we're, scrambling to get. And I did see one item on the budget that I had not focused on that I think we need to address is public art, and go to the Public Art Foundation and make a request of them to give us a letter of support and a commitment as well. I mean, it'd be a great
source of funds.
Yeah.
Elizabeth, unless somebody has another question, I've got a quick other question just so that I can help. I have been getting some calls from writers, and for some reason they don't seem to be able to, when they're sitting in they're calling me on cell phones, so they don't seem to be able to figure out what the schedule is and what bus is going to come to the station where they're standing, and if it'll get them where they're going. How do we, if I'm going to be a source of handing out information, maybe I need to understand it a little better, but I'm hopeful that at a specific bus stop, somebody can look somewhere and figure out what bus is coming and when it's coming and where it's going to take them.
Yes. We'll have similar to what we'll be putting in at Dart Central Station, the large LED signs at each one of the stations that will say what bus and
I'm talking about right now.
On the stops, there should be a small circle on them that says what routes are on that bus. But currently on Ingersoll, there's only Route 11.
Okay, and is there a schedule on there that says when it comes?
Not on the stop itself. They
just hope it comes every 30 minutes or hour or whenever it shows up.
It comes every 30 minutes in the rush hour and every hour in the middle of the day.
Okay, so my answer then is you better pick up and find out where number 11 goes.
Yeah. They can call DART, and our number's 283-8100, and they can give them real-time schedule information.
We can talk about that further later. It's apparently for writers somewhat frustrating.
Okay.
Anything else? Anybody else?
A quick question on city participation with the, if we make a pledge, is that paid out only if the federal funds are drawn down?
Mm-hmm.
So there's no risk that we'd be funding development cost or
Correct.
anything like that?
Yeah. That would be my recommendation to you. I'm sure that's how it would be.
And when would you find out ultimately?
We would be hopeful to end up on an appropriation list for this in the late summer, fall.
Okay.
All right, anything else? Anybody? All right, Elizabeth, thank you very much.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Let's quickly open it up for any comment from the general public here. Public comment, any thoughts, ideas, comments, clarifications? I see that our CEO of the Greater Des Moines Partnership is here, Jay Byers. Jay, good morning. No comments about DART? No, you don't need to, Jay.
We're just here to support. We're very supportive of the project.
Okay, good. Seeing none, for those of you that are interested, we'll see you back here this evening at 4:30 for our city council meeting. Thanks for attending. We're adjourned.